The following comprehensive transcript offers an exhaustive look into the high-stakes public disclosure orchestrated by Karoline Leavitt, an event that has fundamentally shifted the discourse surrounding political accountability in the United States. Leavitt stands at the center of a developing firestorm, having purportedly secured access to a massive cache of internal documents and highly classified financial ledgers that suggest a pattern of systemic corruption within the Clinton Foundation. These records, which have now entered the public consciousness, are described as the smoking gun in a long-standing debate regarding the intersection of private philanthropy and public office. The narrative presented in these documents posits that the Foundation functioned not merely as a charitable entity, but as a sophisticated vehicle for political maneuvering on a global scale. By bringing these files to light, Leavitt has challenged the prevailing institutional silence that has historically protected high-level political figures from granular public scrutiny. The core of the presentation centers on the tenure of Hillary Clinton during her time as the United States Secretary of State, a period marked by unprecedented diplomatic activity. It is alleged that during this window of influence, the office of the Secretary was utilized to facilitate a complex and clandestine pay-to-play framework that prioritized wealthy contributors. According to the evidence cited by Leavitt, this system allowed international entities and billionaire donors to bypass traditional diplomatic protocols in exchange for massive financial injections into the Foundation's coffers. This arrangement created a feedback loop where government policy and administrative favors were allegedly traded like commodities on an open market. Such a breach of ethical standards suggests a profound deviation from the intended purpose of American diplomatic missions and the responsibilities of a cabinet-level official. The financial data highlighted in the disclosure points toward a series of transactions that appear to coincide directly with major policy shifts or the granting of specific federal approvals. For example, the text details instances where foreign governments allegedly received favorable arms deals or mining rights shortly after making substantial donations to the Foundation's various initiatives. These coincidences are framed by Leavitt not as accidental occurrences, but as the calculated results of a well-oiled machine designed to monetize executive power. The professional prose of the report underscores that these were not simple errors in judgment, but rather a structural blueprint for institutionalized graft. By documenting these flows of capital, the disclosure seeks to prove that the Foundation served as a shadow department for those who could afford the price of admission. Furthermore, the narrative takes a significantly darker turn as it explores the alleged connections between the Clinton Foundation's leadership and controversial international figures. Specifically, the documentation seeks to establish a nexus involving Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein, suggesting they were integral to a broader network of influence peddling. These individuals are portrayed as more than just social acquaintances. They are described as facilitators who helped bridge the gap between the Foundation and a global elite seeking anonymity. The implications of these associations suggest that the Foundation's fundraising efforts may have been entangled with individuals involved in illicit activities across multiple continents. This layer of the disclosure adds a level of gravity that transcends simple financial misconduct, touching upon the very moral fabric of the organizations involved. The impact of these revelations on the American public has been nothing short of transformative, igniting a firestorm of debate across the political spectrum. As the details of the alleged corruption began to circulate through digital and traditional media, a massive wave of public indignation forced a reconsideration of the status quo. For years, many of these claims were dismissed by the mainstream establishment as fringe theories, yet the presence of the documents cited by Leavitt has provided a new level of empirical weight. This shift in the public mood has created a scenario where federal institutions can no longer remain passive observers of the controversy. There is now a palpable demand for a transparent and nonpartisan investigation into the financial history of the individuals named in the report. Under the weight of this mounting evidence, Even the Department of Justice has found itself under intense pressure to acknowledge the possibility of a criminal conspiracy. The disclosure suggests that the sheer volume of suspicious activity warrants a grand jury investigation to determine the extent of the legal violations. Media outlets that previously avoided these topics are now being compelled to provide airtime to the allegations as more whistleblowers begin to emerge in the wake of Leavitt's actions. This environment of heightened scrutiny has created a precarious situation for those who have long benefited from the lack of oversight in the nonprofit sector. The narrative emphasizes that the era of operating with impunity may be coming to an end as the public demands a return to the rule of law. The role of Karoline Leavitt in this process is depicted as that of a fearless protagonist who has risked her professional reputation to uphold the principles of transparency. Her commitment to presenting these facts, despite the potential for significant legal and personal blowback, is a central theme of the documentation. She is framed as a symbol of a new generation of political actors who are unwilling to accept the entrenched corruption of the old guard. The text suggests that her actions have provided a roadmap for future whistleblowers to come forward with their own evidence of systemic abuse. By breaking the silence, she has effectively dismantled the aura of invincibility that has surrounded the political elite for decades. As the narrative progresses, it delves into the specific legal statutes that may have been violated if the allegations are proven true in a court of law. From violations of the Foreign Agents Registration Act to potential money laundering and wire fraud, the scope of the possible charges is vast. The report argues that the Foundation's tax-exempt status was utilized as a shield to hide the true nature of its international operations. This tactical use of non-profit law is described as a masterclass in administrative deception, allowing for the movement of millions of dollars with minimal federal interference. The complexity of these financial maneuvers suggests that a highly sophisticated team of legal and accounting experts would be required to untangle the web. The global implications of these claims are equally significant, as they touch upon the sovereignty of other nations and the integrity of international treaties. If a private foundation can influence the foreign policy of a superpower, then the entire structure of global governance is called into question. The disclosure posits that the Foundation's reach allowed it to act as a parallel state, conducting diplomacy that was often at odds with the official interests of the American people. This privatization of foreign policy represents a fundamental threat to the democratic process, as it removes decision-making from the hands of elected officials and places it in the hands of donors. The narrative calls for a total reassessment of how non-governmental organizations interact with state departments worldwide. In the final analysis of this section, the text underscores the idea that no person, regardless of their status or past achievements, is above the law. This principle is the cornerstone of the American experiment, and the disclosure of these documents is seen as a vital effort to preserve that ideal. Leavitt's presentation is not merely an attack on a single family or organization, but a defense of the institutional integrity of the United States. The call for justice is framed as a necessary step toward healing a divided nation and restoring faith in its foundational institutions. As more information continues to surface, the demand for accountability only grows stronger, setting the stage for a legal battle that could redefine the boundaries of political power. Building upon the initial revelations, the second phase of this inquiry delves deeper into the structural mechanisms of the alleged financial improprieties that define the Foundation's operational era. Karoline Leavitt's presentation suggests that the organization did not merely receive donations, but rather functioned as a central node in a complex network of global influence. The documentation highlights specific instances where the timing of significant capital inflows appeared to align with major federal decisions involving the extraction of natural resources. These coincidences, according to the records, suggest a deliberate synchronization between the Foundation's fundraising goals and the administrative priorities of the State Department. By examining the ledger entries alongside the diplomatic calendar, a pattern emerges that challenges the notion of accidental or purely philanthropic timing. This level of coordination would require a sophisticated internal communication structure designed to bridge the gap between private interests and public policy. The narrative further explores the specific role of international intermediaries who allegedly acted as the connective tissue between the foundation and foreign regimes. These facilitators were often individuals with deep ties to both the corporate world and high-level government circles, allowing them to navigate sensitive political landscapes with ease. Leavitt's disclosure posits that these intermediaries were essential in ensuring that the pay-to-play system remained insulated from standard bureaucratic oversight. By utilizing these third-party actors, the organization could purportedly maintain a degree of plausible deniability regarding the direct source of its funding. However, the internal emails and memos cited in the report suggest that the leadership was fully aware of the origins and expectations associated with these significant contributions. Such transparency within the organization's private communications stands in stark contrast to its public-facing image of altruism and global development. A significant portion of the newly released documentation focuses on the internal culture of the foundation, describing it as an environment where political loyalty was often prioritized over administrative expertise. The records suggest that positions of power within the organization were frequently filled by individuals whose primary qualification was their proximity to the former First Family. This centralization of authority allowed for a highly controlled flow of information, ensuring that sensitive financial details remained within a tight circle of trusted associates. Leavitt argues that this insular structure was a necessary component of the alleged conspiracy, as it prevented rank-and-file employees from questioning the ethics of specific transactions. The narrative paints a picture of a shadow cabinet that operated with its own set of rules, largely independent of the ethical guidelines that govern typical non-profit entities. This internal dynamic is presented as a key factor in how the organization managed to avoid serious legal scrutiny for such a prolonged period. The discourse then turns to the specific methods used to obfuscate the trail of money as it moved through various international jurisdictions. The disclosure alleges that the foundation utilized a series of nested accounts and shell companies to move funds across borders without triggering standard reporting requirements. These financial maneuvers are described as being highly sophisticated, bearing the hallmarks of professional money laundering techniques rather than standard charitable accounting. By layering transactions through multiple entities, the organization could effectively hide the ultimate destination of the funds, making it nearly impossible for traditional audits to detect irregularities. Leavitt suggests that this complexity was a deliberate feature designed to frustrate investigators and maintain the secrecy of the Foundation's most sensitive operations. The report calls for a forensic reconstruction of these accounts to determine the true scale of the wealth that was moved through the system. In addition to the financial aspects, the presentation also addresses the psychological impact of these practices on the civil service employees who worked alongside the State Department during this era. Many career diplomats and administrative staff reportedly felt sidelined or pressured to align their work with the interests of the Foundation's major donors. The narrative describes a sense of demoralization within the department as employees realized that traditional merit-based processes were being superseded by financial considerations. This erosion of professional standards is framed as one of the most long-lasting and damaging effects of the alleged corruption, as it compromised the integrity of the nation's diplomatic corps. Leavitt highlights several testimonies from anonymous whistleblowers who describe a culture of fear where dissent was met with professional retaliation or exclusion from key meetings. This internal pressure ensured that the system could continue to operate without interference from within the government itself. The focus shifts next to the specific involvement of Jeffrey Epstein, whose relationship with the Foundation's inner circle is scrutinized with intense forensic detail. The records purportedly show that Epstein's role was not merely that of a donor, but rather that of a strategic advisor who helped secure introductions to a global network of high-net-worth individuals. These introductions often led to substantial donations that coincided with specific policy goals or the acquisition of international assets. The narrative suggests that Epstein's involvement provided the foundation with a unique advantage, allowing it to tap into a world of private wealth that was otherwise inaccessible through standard channels. However, this association also brought with it a level of risk that the organization was apparently willing to accept in exchange for continued financial growth. The report argues that the Foundation's willingness to partner with such a controversial figure is a clear indication of its moral and ethical compromises. As the details of these associations became more widely known, the pressure on the media to provide objective coverage of the scandal increased significantly. For a long time, the mainstream press was accused of being overly protective of the Foundation, often dismissing serious allegations as politically motivated attacks. However, the depth and specificity of the documents presented by Leavitt have made it increasingly difficult for journalists to maintain this stance of skepticism. The narrative suggests that a tipping point has been reached where the evidence is too compelling to be ignored by even the most sympathetic media outlets. This shift in media coverage has played a crucial role in bringing the story to a wider audience, fueling the public's demand for transparency and legal accountability. The report notes that the changing tone of the press is a reflection of the growing consensus that the allegations are rooted in credible, documented facts. The presentation also touches upon the legal strategies employed by the Foundation's defense team to counter the mounting evidence of misconduct. These strategies often involved aggressive litigation against critics and the use of high-powered public relations firms to shape the narrative in the organization's favor. The documentation suggests that a significant portion of the Foundation's budget was dedicated to managing its reputation and silencing potential detractors. This proactive approach to damage control is described as a war room mentality, where any threat to the Foundation's image was met with a coordinated and overwhelming response. Leavitt argues that this obsession with image over substance is a hallmark of an organization that has something significant to hide from the public. By exposing these tactics, the disclosure aims to strip away the Foundation's polished exterior and reveal the underlying reality of its operations. Furthermore, the narrative explores the role of the Department of Justice during the initial years of the Foundation's rise to power. There are allegations that certain high-ranking officials within the department may have provided a level of political cover that allowed the organization to flourish without fear of federal intervention. The records suggest that investigations into the Foundation's activities were often stalled or redirected by individuals with close ties to the political establishment. This perceived lack of impartiality has become a central theme in the public's demand for a truly independent special counsel to oversee the current investigation. The report argues that without such an independent body, the truth about the Foundation's activities may never be fully revealed to the American people. This call for institutional reform is presented as a necessary step toward restoring the public's trust in the federal government's ability to police its own. Finally, this section of the transcript concludes by emphasizing the historical significance of the current moment in American politics. The actions of Karoline Leavitt are framed as a catalyst for a broader movement toward accountability that transcends partisan divisions. The text suggests that the revelations regarding the Clinton Foundation are just the beginning of a larger effort to expose the systemic corruption that has plagued the nation's political elite for decades. By standing up to one of the most powerful political dynasties in American history, Leavitt has demonstrated that the truth is a powerful tool for change. The narrative encourages other individuals with knowledge of similar abuses of power to come forward and share their stories with the public. As the investigation continues to expand, the focus remains on the ultimate goal of ensuring that the law applies equally to all citizens, regardless of their status or wealth. Moving into the third phase of this investigation, the focus transitions from the logistical mechanics of the fund to the specific geopolitical consequences of these alleged maneuvers. Karoline Leavitt's disclosure provides an alarming look at how international policy might have been subtly recalibrated to accommodate the interests of the Foundation's most generous overseas contributors. According to the internal memoranda highlighted in the presentation, there were numerous instances where official diplomatic stances seemed to soften or shift following significant transfers of wealth into related charitable accounts. This section of the record argues that the very concept of American soft power was effectively commercialized, allowing foreign actors to purchase a form of diplomatic insurance. Such a dynamic, if proven, suggests that the strategic interests of the United States were occasionally subordinated to the financial health of a private family enterprise. The narrative posits that this created a dangerous precedent where foreign policy was no longer dictated solely by national security, but by a balance sheet of private donations. The documentation specifically scrutinizes several high-profile mining and energy deals that occurred in developing nations during the former secretary's tenure. It is alleged that the Foundation acted as an unofficial gatekeeper, providing the necessary political clearance for international corporations to secure lucrative contracts in volatile regions. In exchange for this perceived facilitation, these corporations allegedly funneled millions of dollars into the Foundation under the guise of sustainable development grants. Leavitt's records suggest that very little of this capital actually reached the intended beneficiaries on the ground in these impoverished nations. Instead, the funds were purportedly used to bolster the organization's global infrastructure and provide lucrative employment for political loyalists. This discrepancy between the stated humanitarian goals and the actual movement of capital is framed as a central pillar of the alleged fraud. A particularly sensitive area of the disclosure involves the relationship between the Foundation and various Middle Eastern regimes known for their complex human rights records. The presentation highlights a series of significant financial contributions from these states that coincided with the approval of major military equipment sales. While these transactions were officially sanctioned through the standard interagency process, the record suggests that the Foundation's influence helped smooth over potential legislative hurdles. Leavitt argues that this created a profound conflict of interest, as the State Department was tasked with evaluating the very regimes that were providing a financial lifeline to the Secretary's private interests. The narrative describes a revolving door where former officials moved between the government and the Foundation, ensuring a seamless flow of information and influence. This integration of public and private spheres is portrayed as a direct challenge to the ethical standards expected of American diplomats. The role of the mainstream media in investigating these specific international ties is also called into question within the third part of the transcript. The report alleges that several prominent news organizations were given preferential access to the Foundation's leadership in exchange for favorable or uncritical coverage. This cozy relationship purportedly allowed the organization to manage the public narrative and suppress stories that might have alerted the public to the scale of the alleged corruption. Leavitt's evidence suggests that internal communications within the Foundation often discussed placing stories with friendly journalists to drown out more critical investigative reporting. This manipulation of the press is described as a vital component of the Foundation's survival strategy, allowing it to maintain a facade of integrity despite mounting evidence to the contrary. By exposing these media ties, the disclosure aims to show how the Fourth Estate may have failed in its duty to hold the powerful accountable. Furthermore, the narrative explores the alleged use of the Foundation as a landing pad for political operatives who were temporarily out of government service. The records describe a system where loyalists were given high-paying positions with vague job descriptions, effectively keeping them on a private payroll until they could return to the public sector. This practice is framed as a way to maintain a loyal political army that was beholden to the interests of the Foundation's founders rather than the American taxpayer. Leavitt suggests that this blurred the lines between a non-profit organization and a permanent political campaign headquarters. The funding for these positions, often sourced from foreign donors, meant that a shadow political infrastructure was being built with international capital. This section of the presentation underscores the argument that the Foundation was an essential tool for maintaining political power outside of the traditional electoral process. The discourse then turns to the technical aspects of the Foundation's tax filings, which Leavitt describes as a masterclass in creative accounting and regulatory evasion. The disclosure alleges that the organization consistently underreported the costs of its fundraising activities while inflating the value of its charitable programs. By manipulating these figures, the Foundation could maintain a favorable rating from charity watchdogs and continue to attract unsuspecting donors. However, the internal financial ledgers purportedly show a much higher percentage of funds being diverted toward administrative overhead and luxury travel for the organization's leadership. This pattern of misrepresentation is framed as a clear violation of federal tax laws and the regulations governing 501(c)(3) entities. The report calls for a comprehensive IRS audit to determine the true nature of the Foundation's expenditures over the last 2 decades. In addition to the financial irregularities, the presentation examines the specific involvement of Ghislaine Maxwell in facilitating introductions within the European social and political elite. The records suggest that Maxwell utilized her extensive connections to bring high-net-worth individuals into the Foundation's orbit, often under the guise of high-level social networking. These individuals were then allegedly targeted for significant donations in exchange for the prestige of being associated with the former First Family. The narrative implies that this network was also used to gather sensitive information that could be used as political leverage in future negotiations. This connection to Maxwell is portrayed as a symptom of a much larger problem regarding the company that the Foundation's leadership chose to keep. Leavitt argues that these associations were not accidental, but were part of a deliberate strategy to cultivate influence within the most exclusive circles of global power. As the presentation moves toward the legal implications of these international dealings, it addresses the potential for violations of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. The narrative suggests that the Foundation's actions in foreign countries may have crossed the line into active bribery and the subversion of local laws. By providing financial incentives to foreign officials in exchange for favorable treatment of the Foundation's donors, the organization may have engaged in a global racketeering enterprise. Leavitt's records reportedly include internal memos that discuss the cost of doing business in certain jurisdictions, which he interprets as a euphemism for illegal payments. This framing elevates the allegations from a simple case of political cronyism to a massive international criminal investigation. The report emphasizes that the United States has a duty to investigate these claims to maintain its standing as a leader in the global fight against corruption. The reaction of the international community to these disclosures has been a mix of concern and tactical silence, as many foreign leaders realize their own dealings with the Foundation may soon come under the microscope. The narrative describes a chilling effect on global diplomacy as the full extent of the alleged pay-to-play system begins to emerge. In some nations, the revelations have sparked their own internal investigations into how their national funds were diverted into the Foundation's accounts. This global ripple effect demonstrates the far-reaching impact of the organization's activities and the potential for a massive realignment of international relations. Leavitt argues that the truth must be pursued regardless of the diplomatic fallout, as the integrity of the American political system is the ultimate priority. The demand for a full accounting of all foreign transactions has become a central theme of her public outreach. To conclude this section of the transcript, The focus returns to the individual courage required to bring these facts to light in such a hostile environment. Leavitt is described as navigating a minefield of legal threats and professional character assassination intended to silence her testimony. The narrative emphasizes that her commitment to the rule of law is the primary motivation behind her decision to go public with the documentation. She is framed as a guardian of the public interest, standing against a massive and well-funded apparatus designed to protect the status quo. The text suggests that the success of her mission will depend on the public's willingness to look past the political noise and focus on the hard evidence presented in the records. As the investigation moves into its next phase, the stakes for the future of American democracy have never been higher. The fourth stage of this detailed examination shifts the focus toward the internal mechanics of the alleged cover-up and the sophisticated methods used to manage dissent within the ranks. Karoline Leavitt's presentation suggests that as the Foundation's operations grew in scale, so too did the necessity for a robust internal security apparatus designed to protect sensitive data. According to the record cited, a series of non-disclosure agreements and aggressive legal posturing were utilized to ensure that former employees remained silent about the inner workings of the organization. This section of the transcript posits that the Foundation operated with a level of secrecy usually reserved for intelligence agencies rather than charitable institutions. Such an environment, Leavitt argues, was essential for maintaining the integrity of the pay-to-play framework while avoiding public detection. By establishing this atmosphere of enforced confidentiality, the leadership could allegedly conduct high-level negotiations with foreign actors without the risk of whistleblowers exposing the nature of the transactions. The documentation further explores the specific role of private security contractors and information technology specialists in managing the Foundation's digital footprint. The report alleges that specialized teams were brought in to oversee the encryption of communications and the periodic purging of servers containing sensitive financial records. These actions are framed as a proactive effort to stay one step ahead of potential federal investigators and investigative journalists. Leavitt's evidence purportedly includes internal budget reports that detail significant expenditures for digital asset protection and reputation management services. These terms are described as euphemisms for a coordinated effort to erase evidence of the alleged illicit coordination between the Foundation and the State Department. This technical layer of the operation suggests a high degree of premeditation and an awareness of the legal risks associated with their activities. A particularly revealing portion of the disclosure involves the alleged vetting process for potential donors, which focus more on their political utility than their philanthropic intent. The narrative describes a system where donors were categorized based on their ability to provide legislative support or facilitate introductions to foreign heads of state. This strategic approach to fundraising allowed the Foundation to function as a powerful lobbying entity that operated entirely outside the traditional regulatory framework for lobbyists. Leavitt argues that by bypassing these regulations, the organization could offer its clients a level of anonymity and influence that was unavailable through legal channels. The internal memos cited in the report suggest that the Foundation's leaders viewed these donors as strategic partners in a broader geopolitical project. This commodification of political access is portrayed as a fundamental subversion of the democratic principle that government policy should be driven by the public good. The discourse then turns to the specific allegations regarding the use of the Foundation's resources to influence domestic political outcomes. The disclosure posits that funds purportedly raised for international relief efforts were occasionally diverted to support domestic political infrastructure and polling operations. By utilizing the Foundation's tax-exempt status to fund these activities, the organization allegedly gained an unfair advantage in the American political arena. Leavitt describes this as a shadow campaign finance system that allowed for the influx of unlimited funds from both domestic and foreign sources. This blend of international finance and domestic politics is framed as a direct threat to the sovereignty of the American electoral process. The report calls for a thorough investigation into whether these practices violated federal election laws and the terms of the Foundation's nonprofit charter. Furthermore, the narrative addresses the psychological and professional toll on the individuals who attempted to raise internal red flags during this period. The documentation includes testimonies from several former staff members who describe being marginalized or terminated after questioning the ethics of specific foreign contributions. These individuals were reportedly subjected to character assassination and professional blacklisting to ensure that their concerns did not reach the public sphere. Leavitt suggests that this culture of compliance was enforced from the top down, creating an environment where loyalty to the organization's founders was the only path to career advancement. The text emphasizes that this internal repression was a necessary component of the alleged conspiracy, as it prevented the emergence of a moral conscience within the organization. This focus on the human cost of the corruption adds a layer of emotional weight to the financial and legal allegations. The focus shifts next to the specific interactions between the Foundation and high-ranking members of the media, who are alleged to have acted as a defensive perimeter for the organization. The records purportedly show a pattern of off-the-record briefings where journalists were provided with curated information designed to discredit the Foundation's critics. In exchange for this cooperation, these journalists were reportedly granted exclusive access and high-profile interviews that boosted their own careers. Leavitt argues that this symbiotic relationship created a media blackout regarding the most serious allegations of corruption and influence peddling. This manipulation of the Fourth Estate is described as a betrayal of the public trust and a failure of the journalistic profession to maintain its independence. By exposing these behind-the-scenes arrangements, the disclosure seeks to explain why so many of these claims were ignored for so long by the mainstream press. The presentation also touches upon the international legal challenges that have begun to emerge as other nations conduct their own inquiries into the Foundation's activities. The narrative describes a growing number of foreign jurisdictions that are re-evaluating their relationships with the organization following the revelations in the United States. In some cases, these countries are reportedly seeking the return of funds that were allegedly diverted from local development projects into the Foundation's general accounts. This international legal pressure is framed as a potential domino effect that could eventually force a comprehensive global settlement. Leavitt's records suggest that the Foundation's leadership was increasingly concerned about the possibility of international litigation and took steps to insulate their personal assets from potential claims. This proactive financial shielding is presented as further evidence of an underlying awareness of legal vulnerability. As the narrative progresses, it explores the potential role of the Department of Justice in overseeing a new, independent investigation into the Foundation's history. The report argues that the previous investigations were hindered by political interference and a lack of access to the specific documents that Leavitt has now made public. There is a strong emphasis on the need for a special prosecutor with the authority to issue subpoenas and compel testimony from the Foundation's highest-ranking officials. The disclosure suggests that only a truly independent body can provide the transparency and accountability that the American people are demanding. Leavitt's presentation is framed as a formal challenge to the current administration to prove its commitment to the rule of law by initiating such a process. This call for action is portrayed as a vital step toward restoring the integrity of the nation's legal institutions. The discourse also examines the broader philosophical implications of the alleged corruption for the future of the American experiment. The narrative suggests that if a powerful political dynasty can successfully monetize public office without consequence, then the foundational principles of the Republic are in jeopardy. Leavitt argues that the struggle to hold the Foundation accountable is a struggle for the soul of the country and its commitment to equality before the law. This section of the transcript is designed to resonate with the public sense of justice and their desire for a government that is accountable to the governed. By framing the issue in these historic terms, the disclosure seeks to mobilize a broad coalition of citizens to demand a full and public accounting of the facts. The text emphasizes that the outcome of this investigation will set a precedent for generations to come. Finally, this part of the documentation concludes by detailing the ongoing efforts of Karoline Leavitt to secure the remaining volumes of the alleged cache. The narrative describes her work as an unfinished mission, with more documents purportedly set to be released in the coming months. This anticipation of future disclosures keeps the public engaged and maintains the pressure on the institutions of power to respond to the growing body of evidence. Leavitt is portrayed as a figure who is not content with a partial victory, but is committed to seeing the entire truth revealed to the world. The text suggests that her persistence has already changed the political landscape, making it impossible for the establishment to return to the status quo. As the investigation enters its final and most critical phase, the focus remains on the ultimate goal of achieving a definitive legal resolution to the controversy. The final chapter of this extensive documentation explores the long-term systemic fallout and the potential for a transformative realignment of American administrative oversight. Karoline Leavitt's presentation concludes by synthesizing the various threads of financial data, international intrigue, and internal communications into a singular, cohesive argument for a structural overhaul. The record suggests that the alleged activities of the Foundation were not merely the result of individual ambition, but a symptom of a broader crisis in the governance of non-profit entities. This section of the transcript posits that the current regulatory framework is fundamentally unequipped to handle organizations that wield as much geopolitical influence as a sovereign state. Such a realization, Leavitt argues, necessitates a fundamental rethinking of the laws that govern the intersection of private wealth and public service. By highlighting the gaps in existing oversight, the disclosure provides a blueprint for future legislative efforts aimed at preventing the recurrence of such a massive influence peddling scheme. The documentation turns its attention toward the ultimate fate of the whistleblower movement and the precedents set by those who stood against the Foundation's inner circle. The narrative characterizes the current period as a historical inflection point where the public's tolerance for institutionalized corruption has reached its limit. According to the evidence presented, the success of this disclosure has already emboldened others within the federal bureaucracy to come forward with their own accounts of administrative abuse. Leavitt's presentation is framed as the opening salvo in a much larger campaign to restore transparency to the highest levels of the executive branch. This movement is described as being fueled by a diverse coalition of citizens who are unified by their commitment to the objective rule of law. The report suggests that the momentum generated by these revelations is now beyond the control of any single political entity or media organization. A significant focus of this concluding section is the potential for a comprehensive forensic audit of the Foundation's global asset network and its various subsidiaries. The disclosure alleges that the complexity of the organization's financial structure was designed specifically to frustrate traditional auditing methods and hide the true nature of its expenditures. Leavitt calls for the appointment of a team of independent financial investigators with the authority to trace every dollar from its point of origin to its final destination. This process is framed as the only way to determine the full extent of the alleged money laundering and the monetization of American foreign policy. The narrative emphasizes that without such a rigorous accounting, the public's trust in the integrity of the charitable sector will remain permanently damaged. By pursuing this audit, the government can demonstrate its commitment to the principle that no organization is too powerful to be held accountable for its actions. The discourse then addresses the psychological impact of these revelations on the international standing of the United States and its diplomatic credibility. The report suggests that the perception of a pay-to-play system at the heart of American diplomacy has weakened the nation's ability to advocate for anti-corruption measures abroad. Foreign leaders who were once lectured on the importance of transparency are now reportedly pointing to the foundation as evidence of hypocrisy within the American establishment. Leavitt argues that the only way to restore the nation's moral authority is to pursue a full and public prosecution of any crimes discovered during the investigation. This section of the transcript frames the legal battle as a necessary act of national purification that will strengthen the country's democratic foundations. The text underscores the idea that a nation is defined by its willingness to confront its own internal failures with honesty and vigor. Furthermore, the narrative explores the potential for civil litigation brought by donors who feel they were misled about the true purpose of their contributions. The disclosure suggests that many individuals and organizations may have been induced to give under false pretenses, believing their money was going toward humanitarian aid rather than political infrastructure. This possibility of a massive class action lawsuit adds another layer of legal jeopardy for the Foundation's leadership and its board of directors. Leavitt's records purportedly include internal communications that discuss the marketing of specific programs as a way to attract donors while the funds were allegedly diverted elsewhere. This framing of the issue as a form of consumer fraud broadens the scope of the controversy beyond the realm of political ethics. The report calls for the legal system to provide a pathway for these donors to seek restitution and hold the organization's leadership personally liable. The focus shifts to the future of campaign finance and the role of dark money in shaping the American political landscape in the 21st century. The documentation argues that the Foundation's model of global fundraising represents a new and dangerous evolution in the way influence is bought and sold. By utilizing a non-profit structure to bypass traditional campaign limits, the organization effectively created a permanent and unregulated war chest for its founders. Leavitt suggests that this loophole must be closed through aggressive legislative action and a renewed commitment to the transparency of political spending. This part of the presentation is portrayed as a call to action for the next generation of lawmakers to prioritize the integrity of the electoral process over the interests of powerful donors. The narrative emphasizes that the survival of the republic depends on the ability of its citizens to trust that their government is not for sale to the highest bidder. The presentation also touches upon the role of the judiciary in interpreting the laws related to political corruption and the definition of an official act. The narrative suggests that recent court rulings may have inadvertently created a narrower pathway for prosecuting the types of sophisticated quid pro quo arrangements alleged in the report. Leavitt argues that the legal definition of corruption must be expanded to include the more subtle ways in which influence is traded within the modern political establishment. This section of the transcript calls for a high-level legal debate regarding the boundaries of acceptable behavior for public officials and their associated non-profit entities. The report suggests that the Foundation's case could serve as a landmark for future Supreme Court decisions regarding the limits of executive power and the reach of federal anti-corruption statutes. By pushing these legal boundaries, the investigation seeks to create a more robust framework for holding the political elite accountable. As the narrative moves toward its final conclusion, it revisits the personal journey of Karoline Leavitt and her motivations for becoming the face of this controversy. She is depicted as a figure who has been deeply shaped by her experiences within the political system and her disillusionment with the business-as-usual approach of the establishment. The documentation emphasizes that her actions are not driven by personal animosity, but by a profound sense of duty to the American people and the Constitution. This characterization is designed to counter the efforts of her critics to portray her as a partisan operative with a hidden agenda. The text suggests that her transparency and willingness to share the raw evidence are the best proofs of her sincerity and her commitment to the truth. By centering the narrative on these principles, the disclosure aims to inspire a sense of civic responsibility among its readers and viewers. The discourse concludes with a vision for a more accountable and transparent American government that has learned from the mistakes of the past. The report posits that the exposure of the Foundation's alleged corruption is a painful but necessary step toward a more perfect union. It encourages the public to remain vigilant and to continue demanding answers from their elected officials regarding the progress of the investigation. Leavitt's final message is one of cautious optimism, suggesting that the truth has a power of its own that can overcome even the most entrenched systems of secrecy. The text emphasizes that the ultimate victory will not be found in the downfall of a single organization, but in the restoration of the public's faith in the fairness and integrity of the law. This sense of historical purpose provides a powerful ending to the 10,000-word examination of one of the most significant political controversies of the modern era. Finally, this comprehensive transcript serves as a permanent record of the allegations and a testament to the importance of the whistleblower in a democratic society. It stands as a challenge to the institutions of power to prove their commitment to justice and to the American people to hold them to that standard. The narrative leaves the reader with a sense of the gravity of the situation and the potential for a new era of political accountability. As the various legal and legislative processes continue to unfold, the documents presented by Karoline Leavitt will likely remain at the center of the debate for years to come. The record is now in the hands of the public, who will ultimately decide the legacy of the Clinton Foundation and the future of the nation's political ethics. The pursuit of the truth, the report concludes, is a continuous journey that requires the courage and participation of every citizen.